Welcome to Job Talks Access. Today, we're speaking with Jack McCormick, who's a human resources manager. How are you today, Jack?
I'm doing well.
Thanks for coming on and joining us. I wonder if you can start us off by just talking about your current role and the type of things you do.
Yeah, so I actually very recently, actually today, started a new role. So I'm just learning about that role now. But through for the last 3 years, I've worked um, at a hospital in a human resources role, where I was responsible for things like training new employees. Um, Developing training plans for organizational departments, and helping managers with performance issues with staff.
Right. And as far as human resources over the course of your different positions, is there a part you say you enjoy most about it?
You know, I've always been someone who's found the strategy behind business very interesting. And I think what drew me to human resources is the fact that, it's a very strategic area within business and it's very people focused. Myself being a definite extrovert, I very much enjoy the people oriented nature of
Right.
human resources work.
And could you tell us a bit about your general career path and the steps you took to get to where you are now?
Absolutely. Um, so I am first of all, went to Wilfrid Laurier University and studied business administration, um, and also specialized in human resources. Throughout my time at Laurier, I was lucky enough to participate in a co-op program and was able to get work experience at the provincial government as well as a leading Canadian financial services institution in human resources roles, which I think were really helpful for me in terms of finding my role when it came time to graduation. So my first role out of university was working at a hospital in the human resources role I described. And about 2 years in, I was promoted. And then, as I said, am recently started a new role as a human resources manager. So, uh, yeah, having that really good educational background with some practical co-op experience was really helpful for me.
Yeah, definitely. In your experience yourself, or maybe in dealing with others, would you have any comments about accessibility in the job search and hiring new employees, things like that?
Yeah, I know for myself, I have a severe visual impairment, so I use a screen reader when I'm using the computer. And in terms of job search, I found many of the application forms on companies' websites not always to be fully accessible, which could, be incredibly frustrating.
Definitely.
And for people who are with disabilities looking for jobs, I would encourage them to really stay strong and keep searching. You've got to apply for a lot of jobs to even get a few, you know, messages back. And most of the messages you get back will be, thank you for applying, but we've considered someone else. And that's something that applies to everyone. I also think it's really important to leverage networks and find people in your own network that to really help create some of those connections, because that can really get your resume put to the top of a pile. And I also think it's really important to look out there for what other resources are available. there's lots of great organizations out there that are working to help people find roles, and those organizations can really make a difference.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, in your experience, have you come across any barriers as far as accessibility? And have you noticed any improvements over time in that regard?
That's a great question. There's certainly still, plenty of accessibility barriers out there in the employment landscape for anyone who's got accessibility needs. And I'll tell you kind of one story that really stands out to me in terms of accessibility barriers. So, as I mentioned, my role at the hospital, a big chunk of my responsibilities was related to training and development. And
Hmm.
one piece of that work involves developing those e-learning courses for hospital employees to complete. And every single e-learning course authoring tool on the market is capable of creating uh, e-learning courses that are accessible, but none of the tools themselves used for making the courses are actually accessible. And there's
Okay.
some pretty large companies out there that make these tools, and they don't bother making uh, them screen reader accessible for someone like me who can't see the screen. Um, so barriers like that, technological barriers, still do exist, and it's not exclusive to the human resources space. Um, but what I've noticed change over time is there's a lot more organizations and a lot more people in organizations that are very open to uh, including people with disabilities and finding ways to make accessibility work in the workplace. And there's still plenty of employers out there who aren't as willing to do that, but it's about going out there and looking for them. And I certainly think there's more and more every day.
Right. And I'm interested you on your perspective as a HR professional. Would you have an opinion on disclosure? And I hear varying opinions as far as people, would rather disclose and have everything out there. And sometimes that's uncomfortable to do. And maybe some people are less ready to put everything about themselves, on paper. Um, so what would you say about that type of experience for an employee?
Absolutely. I can talk to this in quite a bit of depth as a human resources professional, and I'll share my own experience too. But first of all, in the interview process, an employee doesn't have a duty to disclose their disability unless there's a item in the job description that they won't be able to complete.
Right.
Unless they can complete it with accommodations. If there's accommodations that can be put in place, then that person doesn't need to start talking about accommodations until they've signed their offer. The example I'll give you is myself as someone with vision loss. If I signed up for a job that required me to, you know, drive a bus, I would need to let the hiring manager know and disclose my disability that, hey, I can't actually drive a bus. But
Right.
if I was applying for a job that maybe required occasional travel, I wouldn't need to disclose that because I could always take public transit between different locations if that was the context. Um, so I personally uh, think it's really important to, at the time of your hiring, at the very latest, let your manager know that I've signed my offer letter. I'm really excited to get started. Just so you know, I have a disability, and here's some of the things that really help me, and here's how you can support me so that I can succeed in my role. Um, I personally tend to like to try and find positive opportunities to disclose my disability sooner. Sometimes it's pre-COVID, of course. If I was going to like a big uh, office building for an interview, I would disclose my disability just before maybe the day before the interview, and just say, just so you know, uh, I have very low vision. Um, is it possible for me to give you a call when I arrive to the entrance of the building and you meet me there, because it will be challenging for me to find the specific office in this large building. And that's something that I've had really positive results with. Um, or in an interview, I'll bring it up as it feels right. And not every interview it needs to be brought up, and it just kind of do what feels right.
Mhm. Yeah, I would imagine that most employers, at least hopefully, would in the ideal situation want to work with you so that everyone's successful and everyone's getting the most out of the experience.
Absolutely.
And one more thing for you, Jack. I'm wondering if you could pinpoint one thing that you think would be our next greatest step forward as far as accessibility in the workplace. What do you think that would be?
So, something I firmly believe is that in order to create more inclusive and diverse and accessible workplaces, we simply need more people with disabilities in all roles and organizations. One thing we've seen in the past quite a bit is uh, people with disabilities exclusively in roles that relate to accessibility, which is great. People with disabilities are, definitely bring a unique perspective to an accessibility based role. But there's so many other roles out there, and we need to see more people with disabilities in all kinds of different roles throughout organizations, because one of the best ways to eliminate biases and uh, change perceptions is by exposing people to individuals who have disabilities and showing how capable they can be in the workplace. I can't tell you how many people I've worked with over the years who, maybe felt a little uneasy at the beginning of me working with them, and as they got to know me and as they got to see the quality of my work, realized that uh, I wasn't very much different from them and that I could do the job, and are now accessibility allies and would hire someone else with a disability in a heartbeat.
Right. Yeah, I think that's so important because just bringing an accessibility perspective to all kinds of different roles is going to end up being beneficial to everyone in the end.
Absolutely.
So thanks so much for joining us, Jack, sharing your thoughts and insights and helping us out to make a difference with the project.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That was Jack McCormick. I am Paul Vandergren, and this has been Job Talks Access.